Welcome back to the Chiefs Pit. We're going to do something a little different today. Richie's not here. Mark's not here. Obviously, I got two guests. This is Dennison and Liddell. John Dennison from where in Colorado?
Denver.
Colorado.
Well, I'm from Penrose, Colorado.
Okay, Penrose.
Yeah.
And this guy right here, Mr. Ron Liddell of the Dennison Liddell Bonneville Flats efforts.
Ron Liddell from Redding, California.
And some of Ron's tie-in with us is he knew Terry Elledge early on, which Terry Elledge probably got you out to back east.
He's the one that brought me back east, yeah.
And our tie-in, we all have worked together at RCR, ECR over the years, several championships. I don't know how to really get into that, but we're going to go back early on. We'll start with JD from Colorado. Danko or Erie? Which one is that little third-mile track in
Erie? Yeah.
And then later on, they went to Colorado Springs. Remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
But
Pikes Peak, that was a mile track.
So you've been in racing. How? Tell some of the stories about you telling your dad you was really kicking it off and you was barely being able to eat your early on career.
Oh, yeah. I went to work at an engine shop in Denver right out of high school, and I really wanted to work there. And they didn't offer me enough money to live on, so I lied to my dad.
You're saving money, aren't you, son?
Yeah. And he had to co-sign for the apartment because I was only about 18 years old and I didn't have any credit. Well, about 3 months. Well, that was probably 6 months after I was there. He called me one day and said, "Everything okay?" And I said, "Yeah, it's fine. Why?" "Well, the apartment manager called me and you're like 4 months behind on your rent." Well,
it's not funny, but it's true.
I had enough money to either eat or pay the rent.
And you decided to eat that way.
That's what I wanted to do, so it didn't matter to me.
Right.
So yeah, that's through that is how I actually got here, through that shop, just knowing people.
What year did you come east?
I moved to North Carolina in 1995.
Who'd you go to work for?
Prototype Engineering, Ron Neal.
Okay. I remember some of the story, yeah.
Yep. I worked for him for a year, and then I went to work for a place called T&L. That's where I met you. When I worked at T&L.
What's the first time you ever, and where were we at?
We were at Monroe, Washington, in that horse barn. Remember?
Yeah.
Because it rained. You remember?
Was it the chickens or the pigs? It was a livestock barn.
It was a livestock barn.
Because it was a fairgrounds raceway.
Yeah. And it rained so much that you pitted inside the
Well, I'd actually seen you. I just had never met you in one way, shape, or form.
Well, when they put us all inside in that barn, you didn't have any choice.
So I guess that's back in the days when we all changed valve springs.
That's what we were all doing, yeah.
And we were beating, the living snot out of all that stuff.
And you were singing.
And I was singing probably George Strait or something.
Yeah.
And JD's quote was, "Who's that idiot over there singing?"
Right.
And that's Timmy Petty. So he come up and talked to me, I guess, that day, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So that was...
It's probably 2000. It was probably 90s.
In the 90s.
8?
I'd say so. It was 97, 98.
Yeah.
Maybe even earlier, but...
It was the end of 99 that I went to work at RCR. So it was before that, probably 97.
That was Lloyd and
McCleary, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to get off you for a minute and go to Ron. So you're from Redding or Susanville?
Redding,
okay.
California.
Because Terry Elledge was from Susanville, right?
I've known...
And Skinner was from out there.
Mike Skinner was from Susanville, California. And I had met Terry as just a little boy because of my father.
Yes, sir.
That was an engine builder. I think my father met Terry, I'm going to say somewhere around, 1978-ish in there. But that's how... just a long story, but that's how I kind of got into engines through my father and everything, and then Terry ultimately is the one that brought me out back east. Yeah.
So I've heard some of the stories about the way that Terry called you up and you came to work at RCR.
Yeah, so I started working. My first legitimate job in a machine shop, engine shop, was a place called Lansing Engines in Redding, and it was more of a production shop. That's kind of where I learned to do my machine work. And when I was probably 22 or 23, I went to work there when I was about 17, and I left there and I tried to start building race motors on my own, and then I had a late model that I was building, and I needed the guy in town with the dyno had left town, and I needed it, so to make a long story short, I ended up going down near Los Angeles and meeting a guy named Lanny Treves that owned LTR Racing Engines, and I dynoed down there, and then that's how I got a job there. which led me.
I didn't realize you worked in L.A.
Yeah, well, maybe call it 45 minutes outside of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And so I worked there for a couple of years, and we built everything from mostly a lot of super late model Winston West engines, that kind of stuff. And, you had to travel with the cars. And I had run into Terry, I want to say early 96 at Phoenix, and knew Terry quite well just from the length of time, and his wife Diane. And so I actually talked to Diane at the racetrack, and she asked me what I was doing, and I kind of told her what I was doing, and then didn't think anything more of it. And then I'm going to say about September of 96 is when Terry said they were looking for, younger guys to come out to RCR and build engines, and that's kind of how I got out of here. So, of course, I just
So you guys were kind of doing the same thing out on the western front. And like you knew, I guess, Rick Corelli and all that stuff through your guy. And
I was working for an engine shop in Denver called Madcap Racing Engines.
Right.
And we did a lot of Southwest Tour, that kind of stuff.
We'd actually talk. We probably crossed paths.
That's what I'm asking. Where did you guys actually come in?
No, I knew we probably had crossed paths and been around each other.
Kind of like me and you did out there. Yeah,
right. We were doing some Winston West and Southwest Tour stuff for like Rick Corelli, Roger Avance. There was, the kind of...
So pretty much the same kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, and that's cool. And so later on you start, and tell about the first day you started. I love that story. So with Diane cooking your breakfast, and you drove for like 4 days straight.
So I was single, and I lived in a double wide trailer. And I didn't have a whole lot to my name, but I did have a double wide trailer full of furniture and everything. And so when I interviewed at RCR, they flew me out there, and they wanted me to stay a week. And so I didn't understand why. So they gave me a rental car, a place to stay, and I basically just drove around the Charlotte area, went to buy some of the race shops, and after a couple of days got kind of bored, and showed back up at RCR and kind of asked Richard Childress, why I was supposed to be there for a week, and he said something like, well, you're from California, it's a little bit different out here. We just want you to get a lay of the land because it's going to be a culture shock living in the South. So
it certainly was, wasn't it?
It certainly was. And so I said, well, I'm good. So he offered me the job, and he asked me when I wanted to start, and I said, well, let's just make it the first of the year in 97.
That's the same thing I did, but go ahead.
And he said, no, I need you now because the season wasn't over yet. So I basically flew home, landed at LAX, drove an hour to my place, changed my clothes, drove up to my hometown, which is about 9 hours north, said goodbye to my mom, my dad, and drove back down, and then got in my truck, and I threw my clothes, I think a television set, and my toolbox in my truck, and left everything in the house and drove back out here in 2.5 days. And by myself, and showed up at Terry's house about midnight.
Terry's in the bed.
Diane let me in the house, and then I hadn't been in a hotel. I stunk. I was in the same clothes, and the next morning about 6 o'clock, Diane wakes me up for breakfast, and I don't remember what day of the week it was, but I'm sitting there eating breakfast, and she says, "Do you remember how to get to the shop from here?" And I said, "I think so." And she said, "Well, they start at 7 o'clock. You better get going." And I said, "Like right now?" And she said, "Terry's waiting on you." So I literally took a shower, put some clothes on, and went to work. And I had a few things in the back of my truck that was covered with a tarp, and I didn't have anywhere to live. And I think after about 2 weeks of living with Terry and living out of my truck, I finally had to get my own apartment.
That's where Chocolate Myers comes in. Didn't he come out here and see?
Chocolate tried
you
to
was driving that truck, looked like the Beverly Hillbillies out there.
And it looked like Beverly Hillbillies, and they kind of knew I was,
struggling.
I didn't really have anywhere to live, but we worked 7 days a week, so I just never had any time.
Right.
And so finally, Chocolate said, he showed me some apartments, and I found this little one-room cabin that was furnished, and I think it was $175 a month. So that's where I got my first place in North Carolina in Thomasville.
I love it.
Yeah.
So, back to JD here. You were working at T&L, and then what year did you start at RCR?
I started at the end of 99.
Okay. And why? I mean, how'd that all come about? Because I don't really know the whole story there.
I was actually looking to do something different, and we were doing some lease engine stuff for some different Cup teams. There was a team called Eel River Racing back then.
I remember that. Barry
deal.
Dodson, yeah.
Yeah, it was like the Bahari deal, and then we were doing actually when Andy Petrie had his team, we were doing all the qualifying engines for them, and then we did all the race engines for Kenny Wallace. We drove so.
This was with T&L.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
So I was going to the racetrack with that stuff, and I knew Danny Lawrence from the racetrack. So we were actually at a Daytona test, and RCR was getting ready to start this Busch team, which Ron was gonna take care of all the stuff. So Danny hit me up at Daytona to see if I wanted to come over there to work with Ron.
To run the Busch stuff.
No, just work with Ron. There was going to be like 3 teams to start with, and there was going to be like 2 tuners at the racetrack, and just
plus they were doing a lease deal too through RCR.
They
right?
had 2 of their own teams.
That's kind of when that all started, right?
They had 2 teams on their own. That's when Harvick first went to work there. Mike Dillon drove the other car. Then there was a lease engine deal, and
59 car.
so me and Ron were going to take care of 3 cars.
Yeah.
So that's how I went to work there was
No, I knew
started,
some of
this.
this.
If they had
never
not
heard
started
it in
the
the
Busch
story.
deal, and at that time T&L was kind of known for the Busch engines.
Oh yeah, at one time we went to Charlotte Motor Speedway, and y'all had what 20
We probably
out
had
of
half the field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So we were,
Danny
Unbelievable.
asked me. He said, "I'm hearing about this guy, John Dennison. Would you scope him out at the track?" And somebody said JD, and so I thought that was his name. So I can't remember which racetrack it was, but I was looking.
It is. It's
for
JD
John.
Dennison.
I was looking
Nobody
for John
knew
in
me
the
by John.
garage.
Nobody knew me by
and I
John.
knew he
Right.
worked for T&L.
Right.
And so I knew they did like Andy Houston. I knew the cars they did. So I'm walking around the garage, during when you got a few minutes, saying, "Hey, where's JD at?" And
John. Probably asked for John.
or John,
Because
And
nobody knew John.
and nobody knew John.
And you were
so
standing there.
I went back home and said, "I don't think that guy works for T&L because there's nobody.
There's no John.
There's no John." And so, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's how that all went.
So long awkward pause here. I guess I'll get a roll on. So, how do you feel like you kind of screwed him over?
Well, Dale Earnhardt getting killed was probably the thing that they had a plan. He was the engine tuner for the 2 AC Delco car.
Okay.
Kevin Harvick.
And you were going to rise up with him
That
eventually,
team was going to go to that was going to be the 30 Cup team the next year.
which they had the 29.
They
there was
had
no
the
29.
the 3 and the 31.
Because at one time there was 3 Cup teams there.
There was 2 when we started. There was
Just
there
2.
was-
I know. I'm getting ahead of
So
myself.
the
but I'm
30 was going to be Kevin Harvick's Cup team.
The AOL.
Okay.
Internet
AOL
car.
was signed.
So that was their deal. Until
their whole
Earnhardt-
team, their AC Delco team, was going Cup racing with Kevin Harvick the next year.
So it was going to happen either way.
And then
It was
Dale
on-
Earnhardt got killed. Well, then everything got. So then Kevin started driving.
So he moved
became
to-
the 29.
He took over Earnhardt's deal, which I guess Danny was
Well,
the
I'll
tuner
tell you
then?
what's. I'll tell you.
Danny was the tuner there, but that's when Danny decided he didn't want to be the tuner anymore.
Oh, okay. So that changed the whole
I
dynamic.
can tell you another story about that.
Okay.
Because Daytona testing, which would be the very beginning of 2001, so Speed Week.
Mhm.
We used to go down there. I can't remember if we did it maybe December, January.
Probably both.
So the plan was that team was supposed to go to the 30 car, become the 30 car.
The whole
so
team.
there would have been a 3-car team in RCR. And talking to Will and Danny, they had asked me when Danny was going to step aside, they had asked me to do the 3-car. So my plan that nobody knew about was I was actually at the end of 2001, instead of going to the 30, I was going to just stay at the 3
Okay.
and just take over for Danny.
But everything
Obviously,
changed. Like
everything changed at Daytona.
instantly.
Yeah.
Poof.
Yeah. That and
No, I never knew that story.
there was probably 45 people's lives that changed.
Mhm.
Direction, anywhere from pit crew members to crew chiefs to drivers. If you really sit back and look at who changed what job due to Dale's death, it's quite big if you really stop and look at it.
Basically,
it
the
changed
wheels
Jeff
fell
Green's-
off, and they had to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And it makes sense.
Jeff Green's career took a different path because of it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, there's probably 10 stories all wrapped in one. Big stories. Which
Yeah.
we don't have time to cover them
No.
today. But
No.
moving forward, so I guess I start at RCR. It was still RCR engines too in 2006. And the first year we were there, and we're going to put a picture up there, 22 wins, Busch Championship, BGN, and we were all still there together. What were you doing at that time in 2006?
In 2006, that would have been, I want to say, I was racing on the Jack Daniels team.
You were still cupping.
I was still cup racing, yeah.
And JD, John, by the way, I know him. He was my boss here as a tuner. He was my road boss, and Lanny was my boss because I went to work there as an assembler / tuner, and nobody was doing it. I didn't know. I didn't know that you were either or. It was not mixed up.
Right.
For several years, I was an assembler / tuner,
Yeah.
and under his leadership, and which, man, I always enjoyed it. We had a great time.
We did.
Won bukus of wins in the bush, and the cup deals were doing really well too at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, and then we merged with DEI.
DEI in 2007.
Yeah.
But and there were some of those guys that came over, and some of them are still there to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And moving forward, you guys, what year did you start the Denison Liddell Bonneville thing? Because I know you guys we'd go to
John talked me into
Watkins Glen, and he would always miss. Here the road manager is, and I'm going to go to Bonneville.
John talked me into it at the end of 2011. So we officially started building it basically January 1, 2012, and finished the car in
2014 was the
June
first
of
year we
14.
went.
Yeah.
So
And it
who's the
rained.
longest running sponsor of the Denison Liddell?
Probably Moonshine
Probably
Speed Shop.
Moonshine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it started out just $100 bill
Yeah.
to go, and where you guys could take your crew. And at the time, it would feed everybody at the pepper mill.
The buffet. Yeah.
Yeah.
But now it's a $200 deal, and I don't think
I don't think
feeding
200 does it.
I don't think you're feeding them all with what little. And the moonshine decal cost them a record one year. By the way, could you tell that
Yeah,
story?
blew off. Yeah. We missed setting a record by what? Like
Well, we set the record, but we had to reset the record at the end
And
of
the
week.
decal, I used a cheap
I
decal.
wish
What
I
you
had a
said?
picture of
we
that
had
because
we got
We'll
beat.
find it.
There was like 3 cars that year that we kind of traded the record for a week.
Yeah.
And at the end of the
That was probably the most competitive Bonneville.
absolutely. And at the end of the
yeah.
week, we ended up not having the record by like
0.7 miles an hour.
And you estimated that the flutter of the sticker.
The decal came unstuck and it was sticking out.
And that was just enough.
I think so.
All the other decals held like they were supposed
So it was
to.
my fault.
I'm
But you
gonna,
guys
we
didn't.
pretty much have held you responsible ever since.
Not sure that buffet was actually worth what it cost us in the long run, but we're still friends.
Probably not. I just want to go on the record and say I am sorry for using cheap decals.
Right. You've since upped the decal quality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
No,
did.
they
I
haven't
did.
come off
I got
since.
better decals after that,
Yeah.
and it made me a better person.
The shirts are a lot better. If I knew I was doing this podcast today, I would have worn the.
I got mine on under, believe it or not. So we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, yeah.
So what else do we got? I mean, you guys are like really good friends from almost day one you met.
I'll tell you a story.
Please do.
Ron has always been known as somebody that's maybe a little bit difficult.
Kind
to
of a
get
big
along
old
with.
butthole.
Not well.
That's the way I would describe
Hard to
it.
get along with sometimes. And I remember the first day I came to work at RCR. I can't remember who was showing me around. It wasn't Spinny, because Spinny and Ron were always tight. It was somebody else showing me around, and they said, "You're going to love this place. You're going to get along. Everything's good.
But one guy.
There's going to be one guy that you're probably going to have to deal with, and you just got to
Weed through him.
You just gotta figure him out. And once you do, he's a good dude. He's just kind of sometimes hard to deal with, and that's Ron. And I think we went to lunch like maybe the second day I was there, and I think in 25 years we went to lunch every single day.
Really?
After that, yeah.
So you're both big old buttholes. is
Must
what you're saying.
be,
Yeah.
must be, yeah.
No, that's great. And like I said, we've had some really good times working together, and still kind of collaborate on a lot of issues.
Mm-hmm.
Against your better advice, I'm still doing a project, but we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But no, I just appreciate you guys coming. Anyway, guys, thanks for dropping in. Like and subscribe. Check us out next week.
And he did that en route to winning the NASCAR Busch Series Championship. He is the runaway point leader in 2006, and he's going to put a Raceway Park win on his mantle, perhaps to go along with a championship trophy. Kevin Harvick, winner tonight.